March 24th, 1944. Stalag Luft III, Sagan, Lower Silesia. The air was cold, sharp enough to sting the lungs. Snow still clung to the edges of the barracks, grey and crusted, refusing the first touches of spring. Beneath the frozen soil, in absolute darkness, a man crawled forward on his elbows. His name was Flight Lieutenant Robert McBride, and he was moving through a tunnel no wider than a coffin. The wood frame above him groaned. Dirt pressed against his shoulders. Behind him, 75 more men waited in silence, each one breathing shallow, each one counting seconds until freedom or death. This was Harry, and tonight it would break. In 1942, the Luftwaffe opened Stalag Luft III with a singular purpose: to hold the most persistent escapers in the Allied air forces. It was not a death camp. It was not a labor camp. It was something else. A cage designed by engineers who believed in the impossibility of escape. The camp sat on sandy soil, chosen specifically because tunnels would collapse. Barracks were raised on stilts so guards could see beneath them. Microphones were buried along the perimeter to detect digging. Seismograph needles traced every footstep. The forest beyond the wire had been cleared for 100 yards in all directions. No cover, no shadow. Floodlights swept the compound every 12 seconds. The commandant, Oberst Friedrich Wilhelm von Lindeiner-Wildau, was a decorated officer of the First World War. He was not cruel. He was precise. He told his prisoners on arrival, "Gentlemen, you are officers. You will be treated as such. But understand, this camp cannot be escaped." He believed it. The prisoners did not, for they were bomber pilots, fighter aces, navigators, men who had flown through flak and fire, men who had watched friends explode mid-air, men who had bailed out over hostile territory and been captured in fields and forests across occupied Europe. They came from Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Norway, France. They spoke different languages, but they shared one creed. It was their duty to escape. Not for survival. Not for revenge. For duty. The Geneva Convention stated it plainly. Captured officers were honor-bound to attempt escape. Every day they remained behind wire was a day they could not return to the fight. Every guard assigned to watch them was a soldier pulled from the front. Escape was not rebellion. It was warfare by other means. And so they dug. As they called themselves, the X-Organization. It was a shadow command structure, invisible to the Germans, operating inside the wire with military discipline. Roger Bushell, a South African-born RAF squadron leader, led it. His face bore a scar over one eye, a souvenir from a crash in France. He had escaped twice before. Once, he had been recaptured within miles of Switzerland. The Gestapo had interrogated him in Prague, beaten him, and sent him here. He was 33 years old. He had no illusions. "We are going to get out," he told the men in the early days of planning. "Not 2 or 3. Not a dozen. 250. It was madness. It was also calculation. Bushell understood that even if most were recaptured, the chaos of hunting hundreds of escaped prisoners across the Reich would tie up thousands of soldiers, and drain resources, spread panic. It would prove that the Allies, even behind wire, could strike. They would dig 3 tunnels simultaneously. If one was discovered, the others would continue. They named them Tom, Dick, and Harry. The men worked in shifts: diggers, haulers, dispersers, lookouts, forgers, tailors, engineers. Every role was vital. Every role was clandestine. The tunnels began beneath stoves in the barracks, the only structures with foundations deep enough to hide a shaft. They dug down 30 feet, below the microphones, below the seismographs. Then they dug forward. The tunnel was 2 feet square. A man crawled in. dragged a wooden trolley behind him, and dug with a trowel or a bent spoon. He filled bags made from long underwear, tied them to the trolley, and tugged a rope. The hauler behind him pulled the trolley back, and had to pass the bags to the dispersers. The dispersers emptied the sand into sacks hidden beneath their trousers, then walked casually into the yard and released it in the gardens, under barracks, into the latrines. Tons of sand, every handful accounted for, every grain hidden. They built an air pump from a kit bag and metal tubes, lungs for the tunnel. A man sat in the dark and worked a bellows, hour after hour, pushing air forward so the digger would not suffocate. They strung electric lights along the tunnel ceiling, stolen bulbs wired to stolen cable tapped from the camp power line. They built trap doors and shored the walls with bed slats, over 4,000 boards pilfered from bunks across the camp. Men slept on sagging mattresses, their spines curved, saying nothing. Tom was discovered in September 1943, when the Germans poured it full of sewage. Dick was sealed and used for storage. Harry alone remained. The forgers worked in a hidden room beneath a barracks. They produced travel documents, work permits, identity papers, replicas so precise that they used brushes made from a single hair, ink brewed from soot and beetroot, stamps carved from boot heels. They studied German typefaces, German grammar, German bureaucracy. Every paper had to be perfect. A smudged date, a wrong stamp, and a man would be shot. The tailors converted Royal Air Force uniforms into civilian clothes. They dyed jackets with boot polish, recut trousers, stitched overcoats from blankets. They fabricated Wehrmacht uniforms for men who would pose as guards escorting prisoners. Thread was pulled from socks. Buttons were cast from melted spoons. Their maps were traced from atlases in the camp library, reduced to pocket size, printed on silk. Compasses were made from broken phonograph needles, magnetized by rubbing them against a magnet smuggled in a care package. Money, Reichsmarks, zlotys, crowns, was counterfeited or traded with bribed guards for chocolate, cigarettes, anything. Everything was made from nothing. By March 1944, Harry stretched 335 feet. It ran beneath the wire, beneath the watchtowers, beneath the cleared killing ground, and into the forest. Or so they believed. They had calculated the distance using trigonometry and handmade surveying tools. They had accounted for every inch. The breakout was set for the night of March 24th. It would be a moonless night, cold. The guards would be slow. 200 men were ready, that each had been selected based on language skills, physical endurance, or length of imprisonment. Each had a cover story, a route, a destination. Some would take trains. Some would walk. Some would try to steal vehicles. 87 men planned to head west, toward France. Others would go north to the Baltic, hoping to stow away on a Swedish ship. A few Poles would try to cross into their occupied homeland. Roger Bushell would go to Czechoslovakia. He spoke German fluently. He had contacts in the resistance. He believed he could make it. At 8:30 p.m., the trap was lifted. A man descended into the shaft. Another followed. Then another. The tunnel exhaled a breath of stale air. The electric lights flickered on. The crawl began. They moved in silence. Every sound magnified, the scrape of a belt buckle, the rasp of breath, the creak of timber. Some men were broad-shouldered and had to twist sideways to fit. Some panicked in the dark and had to be coaxed forward by whispers. The tunnel seemed endless. At 10:45 p.m., the lead man reached the end. He pushed up through the exit shaft and felt night air. Then he froze. The tunnel was short. They had miscalculated. Harry ended not in the forest, but 10 feet shy of it, still in open ground, still visible from the nearest watchtower. The exit hole was exposed. The plan, so precise, so perfect, was already broken. There was no turning back. The escapers crawled out one at a time, waited for the searchlight to sweep past, then sprinted for the trees. It was agony. It was chaos. Men stumbled in the snow. The rhythm collapsed. Instead of one man per minute, it became one every 10 minutes, then longer. The cold deepened. The line backed up inside the tunnel. Men lay in the dark for hours, shivering, cramping, suffocating on the recycled air. At 1 a.m., an escaper caught his bag on a timber and the tunnel ceiling cracked. Dirt poured in. The lights went out. Haulers worked frantically to shore the collapse. They saved the tunnel, but lost an hour. At 4:55 a.m., a guard on routine patrol walked near the forest and saw movement. He turned. He saw a figure rise from the ground. He fired his rifle into the air. The alarm sounded. By then, 76 men had made it out. The Gestapo were summoned. The SS arrived. Himmler himself was informed. Hitler was enraged. "More than 70 prisoners of war have escaped from a camp in Germany," he said. "That is a disgrace. It is an insult to the state. Shoot them all." Göring, Keitel, and others argued it would violate the Geneva Convention. Hitler compromised. More than half would be executed. The Gestapo began the hunt. Roadblocks went up across the Reich. Train stations were flooded with police. Every border was sealed. The net tightened. 73 of the 76 were recaptured within 2 weeks. 50 of them were executed. Not in combat. Not while resisting arrest. They were taken from cells, driven to remote roads, told to step out of the car, then shot in the back of the head. Their bodies were cremated. Their urns returned to Stalag Luft III in wooden boxes. Roger Bushell was killed on the road near Saarbrücken, shot alongside a French escaper. Flight Lieutenant McBride was executed in a forest near Breslau. Others died along the autobahns, in rail yards, in fields, and the Gestapo called it shot while trying to escape. They provided no further detail. Of the 76, only 3 made it to freedom. 2 Norwegians reached Sweden. 1 Dutchman made it to Gibraltar. The murders violated every principle of the Geneva Convention. They were war crimes, deliberate and documented. After the war, the British launched an investigation. RAF officers tracked down the killers, Gestapo agents, SS officers, drivers, guards. 18 were tried and executed. Others were imprisoned. Some escaped justice. The story of the Great Escape entered history not as victory, but as testament to duty, to defiance, to the cost of resistance. The tunnel they dug was not just a passage through dirt. It was a refusal to accept imprisonment, a rejection of the idea that men could be caged and silenced. And the SS had built an escape-proof camp. They had buried microphones. They had raised the barracks. They had cleared the forest. They had installed floodlights and guards and guns. And still, 76 men crawled out. Stalag Luft III was liberated in 1945. The tunnels were filled in, the barracks torn down, the wire cut and rolled away. The site became a Polish military base, then a memorial. Visitors walk the ground now, stand where the tunnel emerged, read the names on the stone. 50 names are carved deeper than the rest. They were officers. They were airmen. They were men who flew into the sky and fell to earth, men who were told they could not leave, and who dug their way toward freedom anyway. They knew the odds. They knew the risk. They went because it was their duty. Because a cage, no matter how well built, is still a cage. And because some things are worth more than survival. March 24th, 1944. The night was cold. The tunnel was dark. 76 men crawled through it, one after the other, believing they would reach the forest. 50 never came home. But the tunnel still speaks.